Yeah. Okay, first of all, what are situational ethics? Well, you all know what ethics are, right? Ethics are the moral codes that we live by. The best example of ethics is the Ten Commandments. Pretty much most anybody in the Western world, when they look at the Ten Commandments, minus a few of them, they kind of go, okay, this is sort of the ethical thing. It used to be in front of all courthouses in the U.S. They would have the Ten Commandments. They've made them take them down because now they're just merely the 10 suggestions. But they were the foundation for the Judeo-Christian Western culture, the Ten Commandments. It's kind of like a moral, yeah. Well, it's not so much a moral like the moral of the story, but yes, it's an idea that we ought to live by, a concept we ought to live by, and that's what an ethic is. And it's a precept, and there's two ways to look at it. There are moral absolutes, okay? A moral absolute is a rule or a concept or a law that can't be broken without sin, regardless of the context. Can any of you think of a moral absolute? What? Murder? Okay, murder would be a moral absolute.
Worshipping another god.
Okay. Worshipping another god would be a moral absolute not to do that. Okay? Any other ones?
Denouncing your faith.
Okay, denouncing your faith. All right. There are moral absolutes. A lot of the ethics have to do with how we deal with each other. There's vertical absolutes and there's horizontal absolutes, okay? A lot of ethics are how we treat and deal with each other, but there are both vertical absolutes between you and God. How God goes, this is how it is, and I don't care what you think, this is still how it is. And then there are ethical ones between ourselves and other people. So now, there's also a thing called Christian situational ethics. There are situational ethics, and when you hear people talk about that, usually it's just a ploy to basically say, I do whatever I feel like and justify it, okay? So every situation's different. That way you can't have any real standards. It all depends. And so they can move their ethical lines around like crazy. By the way, most everybody in the secular world does that all the time, okay? Does that all the time. The people who, I don't know if you've ever been shopping with me in Costco, but my wife goes out of her mind, absolutely out of her mind, when the people, they'll buy frozen chicken, right? And they get halfway through the store and they just decide, we have a frozen chicken in the freezer. And rather than walk back and put the chicken back in the frozen department, they just park it in the clothing or something. Never seen that? Well, not chicken, but stuff, I mean, this belongs here, but I decided I don't want it, so I just park it over here. My wife goes out of her mind. And pity the poor person she ever catches doing that. She's going to go full titta on them, If you don't know what that is, you've not lived here long enough, because when you see a local woman go full titta, it's a sight to behold. Okay, and that drives her crazy. Why does that drive her crazy? Because it's not ethical, It's not something you do, right? Christian situational ethics are all laws and rules and principles are ideas and norms are only valid if they happen to serve love in the particular situation, and thus may be broken or ignored if another course of action would achieve more loving outcome. That's a long way to say it's not up to your whim, but it's based on the measurement of that love for God and love for other people are the highest values that we have. Who do you think supported that idea and what he said? Can you think of anybody that ever said that love for other people and love for God are the two highest values?
Jesus.
Yeah. Because remember that context? They said, which are the greatest commandments? What's the greatest commandment? Now, what do you see there? We got 10 commandments and a bunch of other ones. We got 10 commandments, and somebody wanted to know, okay, do all these ethics have the same value? And he basically said, no, they don't. There's two that rise above and dictate our behavior and all the other ones. It's love for other people, and it's love for God. Okay? Or actually, the reverse. Love for God first and love for other people. Those are the highest values. Now, what does that tell you about ethics then?
Messy.
Huh?
Messy.
Yeah, it can be messy, right? Because if everything has to be put through that filter as an ethic. Even if it's stated as an ethic, it has to be put through that filter, okay? And there's a couple key verses here. All the ways of man are pure in his own eyes. Boy, isn't that true? Yes. You know? Everybody can justify everything. Nobody wants to walk around going, hey, I'm the new Adolf Hitler. You know, hey, I'm the new whatever degenerate person there is in culture at the time. Everybody's got an excuse for everything, you know. People who do horrid things to other people say, well, I would have never done that. I would have never been like Kobe drawing on the board when I'm talking. But they've got excuse for everything that they do and a rationalization for everything to do that sort of lets them off the hook or justifies it. And C.S. Lewis once said famously, he says, I'm trying to remember the quote now. An excuse is not a justification thereby. Just because somebody has an excuse doesn't mean that he's justified, doesn't mean that that's actually reasonable and is going to hold up as a true justification. So, all the ways of man are pure in his heart, but what does God weigh? God weighs the spirit, right? The intent, the heart of a man. That's what God's looking at. So he's looking at what's really going on the inside and what the motivation is on the inside. And then Matthew, when Jesus says this, so whatever you wish others would do to you, do also to them. This is the golden rule, of course. For this is the law and the prophets. Okay? He sums it up in all of that. All right. So here comes the fun. With those ideas in mind, and I'll give you a chance to kick it around with each other. Your grandmother is in hospice. You're being told she's likely to die within a week. Okay? Hospice, you know what hospice is? It's kind of the last stop, right?
You know you're going to die.
Yeah, you know you're going to die, and so they usually bring in a special nurse and they hook you up with drugs to reduce the pain and stuff like that. And those gals that run hospice are really good. I mean, they look at somebody where they're at and they go, by tomorrow he'll be gone. Or he's maybe got another week or so, because they see it all the time, right? And they tell you that your grandmother's got another week, but she's suffering. And in hospice, when you're suffering, what they do to relieve it is they crank up the meds, right? But if they crank the meds all the way up, then the meds pretty much shut you down, right? Basically, you're overdosed. Okay, but she's really suffering. She wants to go see Jesus. And she asked you to crank up the painkiller dosage to a level that you both know will kill her. If you do that, have you committed murder? Talk amongst yourselves, see if you find agreement. Okay, give me some thoughts. How many of you think you committed murder? Okay. How many of you think you did not commit murder? Okay, so, huh?
I was yes. I forgot to raise my hand.
Okay, so you think you committed murder, okay? How many of you think you killed somebody but didn't commit murder? What do you mean you didn't? How many of you think you didn't do anything wrong? Okay. How many of you are just not raising your hand? Okay. Yeah, I mean, look at this and these are real life. I'm giving you real life situations here. These are real life situations. What do you do? Would you, your grandma dies, and everybody thinks she died a nice, peaceful death, and you know that you cranked it up, but you did it at her request. Okay, you did it. It wasn't like she wasn't going to die. She is going to die. She's in pain, and so let me ask you this. Let's reverse it. You're laying in hospice. You, as a young person, got some horrid disease, and they go, "I'm so sorry. You're not going to grow up and live out your life like you thought." And the hospice nurse comes in, and you hear her say, "Yeah, they've got about a week." And your body's racked with pain. What would you want somebody to do? Take a second and think about that and tell somebody, what would you want somebody to do? Okay, all right. By the way, we can spend all day on a bunch of these, so we're not going to get through all these, but I gave you the paper so you can have something to argue with about over lunch and stuff. But how many would want somebody to crank it all the way up? Okay. How many would see that as an act of love if they did that? Okay. How many would say, I would never ask anybody to do that? Okay. So we're the room divided. Okay, so what ought we to do? What's the right thing to do?
Well, if you did do that and you got caught, you would get in a ton of trouble. Yeah.
No, you really wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
No. No. Yeah. In fact, frankly, hospice nurses do that quite regularly.
Can I change the scenario? Or?
Yeah. Change the scenario. Listen, change of scenario.
So this is a real life scenario in my family. My grandma was on hospice, and they told her she had like about a week to live because she wasn't eating. And they asked my mom to sign a form saying that they wouldn't give her water so that she wouldn't live starving to death for a whole entire week. And my mom had to make a decision. Is she going to sign that paper or not? And she did sign the paper. And then about 2 days later, Grandma asked for water. And so she gave her some ice chips. And the nurse came in and said, you just did that. Now it's going to prolong her suffering. And my mom felt absolutely horrible. Like, that was real life. Like,
You can see from just this thing, it's a messy world out there. And it'd be hard to condemn a person either way. And frankly, you don't know what you would do till you're in that situation. You can make your decision right here, right now, real firm in the warm, safety, comfort of this room. But when things like that happen, maybe it's not the same. All right, your friend asks you to promise never to tell what they're about to tell you. Ever had that happen? Yes. I'm going to tell you something. Don't never tell them.
don't make that promise.
Okay, you promise. Then they tell you that their stepfather tried to molest them. So there's a high school kid maybe you're working with or somebody like that. Do you break your word? Okay, turn to somebody, tell yes or no. You made a promise. You've made a promise. Do you break your word? All right. So, how many would break your word? Okay? How many would not break your word? Okay? So here's an add-on question. If you broke your word, would you be lying? Okay, I thought you weren't supposed to lie.
You're also not supposed to molest me, so.
You didn't molest her.
That's true about it.
You but you're not the molester. You just know about the molester.
I've worked at camps, and you're liable by law if you notice that kind of thing happening.
Right. That's
Don't tell her.
they've codified that into stuff, and we have an obligation to have to, with something like that, we have an obligation to do that. But we're talking about friendship level type stuff. We're not. You have no legal obligation per se.
I'm a mandatory reporter, even if it's for someone that, like, I'm not working with as a friend, I have to report it. I don't really have a choice.
Right.
I can do it, yeah.
You see the dilemma here, though. So the question is, the question is in the end, are you a liar?
Yes.
You promised you would not do something, and now you go against it. So you've broken your word. You've given your word, now you've broken it. I mean, what's the difference between that and anything else? You sign a contract and say, I'll pay this money. You don't. You've broken your word, right?
I feel like, I guess that falls under lying, but it could also fall, I feel like breaking your word and like, because he wasn't like saying, yeah, I promise with the full intent of breaking the promise.
So
That would be, I feel like a direct lie.
so
You are breaking your word, but I don't know if you're like directly like lying because you weren't breaking, you weren't promising with the intent to break it.
you see how you can get into situations though where you make a promise or a vow that you're supposed to keep, right? Promise or a vow you're supposed to keep, and then circumstances come up that basically, as an act of love, right? Is that what we're talking about? An act of love for this person. That as an act of love, you commit one wrong. Because a lot of times, if she's asking you to keep this quiet, she doesn't want daylight to come in. Your friend doesn't want daylight, right? And it could break the relationship. I mean, I thought you were my friend. I told you that in you can hear all that coming. Yeah.
That's when you I've been through this with one of my friends with something with our youth group about suicide. And the girl was like, you can't tell leaders. And my friend was like, I can't promise anything. That's when you don't say, you never say, I promise that I won't say anything before they say it, because you don't know what it's going to be. You don't know if it's a matter of, for instance, in that case, it's life or death.
Right.
And so she ended up telling the leaders. And the reason she didn't want the leaders finding out was because her parents were going to send her off to, like, it was just really bad, and her dad was just, it wasn't going to be good. But in the case of, it's important to do that because it's a matter of life and death. That's why you never, in my personal experience, I would never say, I promise that I won't say anything.
Yeah, and that's a good rule of thumb. That's how you sort of protect yourself from that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, in this case, if this happened with one of my friends, because stuff like this has happened with my friends, I always tell my mom stuff, because she can, at the very least, my mom can give me wisdom on, like, what to do. But I think, as far as, like, breaking the relationship, I don't care at that point. I'm like, I'd rather you be physically safe than for me to be your friend.
And is that more loving?
Yes, I think so. And
So see how the act of love can break relationships? It's pretty wild. I had a friend who confided in me that he was having an affair. He thought I was safe. He was wrong. And I said, I give you 24 hours to tell your wife or I will. I thought you were my friend. I thought you were my... Yeah, I'm your friend. That's why you have 24 hours to tell her yourself. He did. Created a huge mess. They were separated for months. Finally got back together, and they're still married. That was probably 30 years ago, and he came up to me, a few months after that. Well, actually, it was about a year or so after that. They were back together and thanked me for forcing the issue out in front, But at that time, I was off his friend list, because I was going to bring to light what needed to be brought to light, even though he wanted to keep it quiet. All right, I'm going to pull that one from down on the ponder section. So, would it have been an act of love towards Hitler to have assassinated him before you could put the final solution into play? Would it have been an act of love towards Hitler to have prevented him had you known what he was going to do?
Act of love towards Hitler or toward all the people?
And towards all the people, but even towards Hitler himself. Towards Hitler himself. It would have been an act of love.
Towards Hitler, it would be like an act of love, so Hitler didn't have to commit everything that he did.
Right. Would have been an act of love towards Hitler to have prevented him, by assassinating him, to have prevented him from doing everything he had. Let's just say he had all the plans mapped out. He was ready to do it, and you had the opportunity to kill Hitler. Would have been an act of love towards Hitler to actually murder him. Take some thought about that. Kick it around.
I don't think anybody would have been loving Hitler at that point, so.
I'm just talking about an act of love towards Hitler, so that.
Why not toward all the Jews?
Well, we know it would be an act of love towards them. Yeah, but I'm not asking that question. All right, okay. How many of you think it would be really? How many think it would be an act of love towards Hitler, showing an act that you actually it was a loving thing to do to assassinate Hitler? Okay. Well, an act of love towards Hitler. Okay. How many think it would not be? How many have no idea? Okay. So the reason I bring this up is. Let's take Hitler out of the equation. Ever seen the people in the Hui with the shopping carts, or you ever seen the gal that dresses in a nice dress, and she's got her suitcase by the road and sings? Have you seen her? Okay. She's mentally, I don't know if it's drugs or mental illness or whatever, but she's a homeless gal, and she just she finds some kind of a nice dress, and she stands there and just sings. But she lives in the woods, and she's mentally like and you've all come places where you see the guys with the shopping carts and stuff like that. Okay. Would it be, if you knew that you were going to be that way, if you knew that you might end up, basically defiling yourself in that way, what would you want? What would you want your friends to do if suddenly something snapped? Would you want them to leave you that way? Would you want them to forcibly grab you and make you get treatment and stuff? What would be an act of love towards you if you went crazy like that? Take a second and. Okay, so here we are. You're out in the street corner with your shopping cart, and you're all strung out on whatever drugs it is, and that's caused your drug addiction and mental illness and stuff. You never thought you were going to end up like that way. You never thought you'd go from the Anchor House to a street corner. How many of you think it would be an act of love for your friends to come and grab you and physically force you into treatment? Okay, all right. And you would want that, right? That's what I'm assuming. You, right now, clothed and in your right mind, that's what you would want, okay? Do you ever notice that our social system is designed in anything but love? Because what they're doing is they're saying, you have a right to be crazy. You have a right to you have a right to defile yourself in public. And they act as we're gonna feed you, we're gonna give you food, we're gonna, let you build your tent on our sidewalk in our city and stuff like that. And that's perceived as an act of love. But when you put yourself in that situation, when you say, if that was me, and right now as a sane person, if that's me, if I snap out in my late 70s and Rick's on the corner and you guys come visit Kauai, I want you to go grab me, tie me up, take me to something, and even if I'm screaming, no, I'm fine, I like it here, don't believe me, okay? That would be an act of love. For you to let me be that, stand out there and defile myself, would not at all be an act of love on your part.
What do you mean by defile?
Oh, defile means to humiliate myself publicly. I mean, look, we all see that, no bath and just doing weird stuff, mumbling, talking to myself, pushing my shopping cart around with a million pieces of plastic in it. You're never looking at those people going, wow, I want to be like that. It's like, poor guy. That's what most everybody thinks if they have a heart, or get off my lawn, one of the two. Now you see how love works. It's different, and the way the government approach it is not loving. They think it's loving, but they're measuring love by the wrong standards. All right, back to some of these. Okay, you're smuggling a Bible into a Muslim country on flash drives. It is illegal. At the entry point, they ask you directly if you have any forbidden contraband, which is, of course, what you do. Do you tell the truth? All right, talk to each other. There you go. Okay, all right, here we go. How many of you just bold-faced lie for Jesus? How many of you would say, nope, I'm going to tell them the truth? Okay? All right. Okay? Regardless of the consequences. By the way, that kind of stuff happens all the time. It's still happening. A lot of the missionaries that go to foreign countries right now, from not so much from the U.S., but because you're suspect if you come from the U.S., but if you're going in the Muslim world, a lot of the missionaries that are going there are going under a false pretext. They're going as somebody teaching English as a second language, or they're going as this person or that person. But when they send out their mail-outs to their supporters and stuff, they're going to spread the gospel. They're actually going in disguise, right? And they're doing that work so they can have a fig leaf of legitimacy, but it's really not the truth. Okay? It's really not the truth. So they're, in essence, lying for Jesus.
I don't think that's a lie.
Okay.
You don't think it's a lie? It's just, what if you at the border you say, I don't have any contraband, it's not a
No,
lie?
I didn't say.
Okay.
What you're
Yeah,
saying
what
is false.
it's not a lie. Yeah, and so it gets in a gray area, because technically they can claim it. But the scenario I'm saying here, that would be pretty much a lie.
Well, I just compare it to like the people who are like having church underground, because technically they align to the government as well, but they typically are raised in a lot of places like, oh, they're having church still, even though it's in
So, yeah.
Doesn't Scripture just say, "Do not bear false testimony against your neighbor"? Or does it specifically say, "Do not lie like we think"? And so you wouldn't be bearing any false testimony against your neighbor. Like you would bear false testimony, nothing against your neighbor.
A neighbor is anybody, though.
Yeah. Who's your neighbor? Then Jesus sort of answered that one.
Anyone. Or
I see what you're saying, but you're dicing that thing pretty thin. Yeah.
Are there any like difficult situations where you see that?
Um,
Like have to hide?
well, there is historical situations like that, which I'm going to touch on in a second.
So I was curious your take on this. I feel like some of this is really black and white because of one truth. And that truth is sin is not necessarily an action, but is demeanor behind the action. So if the demeanor is not the demeanor of a sinful nature, and it's a demeanor of Scripture and of God's love and of the Holy Spirit, and I think certain things that we as a culture just immediately say, and we're like a lie, or we're like a murder, killing, something like that, and we're like, oh, that's sin 100%. But where the sin really lies is behind the demeanor of the action itself.
But that's not what that's not just cultural. That the Bible also says.
Yes, but then the Bible says don't murder, but then you see a man's murder in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, and the Ten Commandments, just to be frank with you, it literally is "Thou shalt not kill." There's another word for, actually not murder, not "Thou shalt not kill." So there's another word for just general killing, but murder was a specific intentional act.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that they're trying to do. So the point of this is that we all think we ought not to bear false witness. We ought not to tell lies, right? And then there's these sticky situations that come up where you go, okay, lives are at stake, and so is it therefore wrong to do that? And again, when you look at the two highest values, the love for others and the love for God, they have to inform anything that comes below them. So for the historical precedent on this one, actually, the early church, and you may not realize this, but the early church, as they were collecting the New Testament documents, the Romans fairly quickly got an idea as they were assembling those documents that they were key to the belief structure of the early church. And so when the emperors who were hostile to Christianity started putting the gears in action to get rid of people like you and me, one of the first things they decided is when they busted into a church situation, and churches were meeting underground in catacombs. You know what a catacomb is? Catacomb is an underground burial place, tombs underground. And they could hide there because nobody's like hanging out in the tombs, right? So they would have their church meetings in the catacombs. They would bust into these meetings or find out the houses where the church would meet. And one of the first things they would do is confiscate all the scriptures and burn them, right? And it got so bad, and there was so much danger going on that if there was any fear of it, people would go and bury. They put in pots. And by the way, the Dead Sea Scrolls are a perfect example of that, because the Romans were coming and they were going to destroy all the Jewish scriptures and stuff like that. So they put them in pots, took them up into this nosebleed area of a cave, stuck them in there, and nobody found them until 1948. So they got buried really, really well, And they were 2,000-year-old documents that the Jews had hid, so the Romans wouldn't destroy them. And in a church situation, anybody who gave up holy documents was called by a Roman name traitor, which is where we get the name traitor. Traitor started out originally as somebody who would give away the holy documents of the church. Okay, so they were doing everything they could to deceive the Romans, to hide from the Romans, to work around the Romans. And by the way, there's some precedent for this, even in the New Testament. The apostles defied the government. Acts 5:29, when they said, the government said, "You're not going to be able to go and talk about Jesus," and da-da-da. And what did they say? What was their response? We must obey God rather than man. Yeah. So God, we're going to put the precepts of God before you. In other words, the laws of man are limited. They're checkmated by the laws of God. Okay? And that's a Christian ethic. So you can feel free to bust the laws of man anytime you want if the laws of God override them. Okay. Do you believe Jesus when he says turn? By the way, this conversation actually happened to me with a pretty big, well-known name in the Christian world. Okay. Do you believe Jesus when he says turn the cheek if someone wants to harm you? You and a weaker friend are going to a sketchy part of town. The friend says that they are glad you are there because they can count on you to defend them if trouble comes your way. Do you tell them that you won't defend them? So you see what, you're the pacifist. I turn the cheek, man. I'm not going to lift my hand, harm anybody else. But you and your buddy go into this, it could be a girl, that you're with. In this case, it was a girl. The hypothetical that my friend and I were talking about was a guy and a girl. And they were going to a sketchy part of town. And this guy had a value system that says, I will never lift my hand, even in self-defense. Okay? Should he inform the person he's with that I'm not going to defend you?
Well, Jesus also says to take up your sword. He says to turn your cheek, but then he also says to take up your sword. He says, but now he who has the money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack, and who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. So
Kind of interesting. And he told the disciples to bring the sword to he said, they brought swords, and they go, we got two of them. And he goes, that's enough. Jesus, and this is where it gets weird, right? So I'm not arguing for pacifism here, but there are people that are pacifists. There are whole denominations that are completely pacifist. The question is would you put somebody in danger if you didn't let them know that was your Christian worldview?
Yeah.
So should we be doing that or not? Not so much whether should you hold that position or not. And that position is really hard to hold. So my friend who was a pacifist, I said to him, so really, if you and I were walking down the street and muggers came out and they were attacking me, what would you do? I just pray. I go, I'm not going anywhere with you, So,
Yeah. What happens if it was his child, do you think?
Well, that's where a lot of these rules that you hold so dear just go right out the window, Yeah.
So we're not debating over the decision to defend someone. We're debating over.
Whether you should inform, that you're not going to defend them.
Yes.
Okay.
Tell them.
All right. Your government wants to draft you to fight in a war you think is unjust. What do you do? All right. Talk to your friends and find out. Want to draft you into war you think it's unjust.
What do you mean wants to? They're either gonna or
Well, yeah. I mean, they're sending you the draft notices. Okay. Just because they want to doesn't mean they can. They can try to draft you. Doesn't mean they'll be successful. Yeah. There you go. Okay. Okay, all right. So, what would you do? Give me some responses. What would you do?
there are ways to keep out of being in the draft. Like, is it being a father to a young kid one?
No.
No, there are. Well, I remember in World War II there were things that kept you out of the
Yeah. You
Couldn't you find some way to associate?
shoot your toes off. You could do that.
Or it's like there are things you could do to keep out of being in the draft. Find something to associate yourself with one of those.
You know what? Let me just tell you this story. During Vietnam, they tried to draft my butt, and I had to go for my physical. which is one of the most interesting experiences of my life. I'm with probably 1,000 other guys. We all arrive at this big place in LA. They drove us up from San Diego, and we arrive in this mass facility that's just processing human beings like they're just cattle, like cattle. And I'm standing in line as you have to all get in dressed in this room, put your stuff in a locker, and there's guys pulling off panties. They're like girl panties, that they wore to their physical. And I'm looking at that guy and going, there's no way, man. Guys, there's no way that guy's really wearing panties every day. He's just got a special occasion here, And there were guys, I talked to one guy who kept falling over on the table. What's the matter? What are you doing? And because we're all kind of not wanting to go together. And he goes, I've been awake for 5 nights in a row. He stayed awake for 5 days in a row, so that to his physical, so that when he got there, he would just, collapse at every turn, and just fall asleep. He was falling asleep all over the place, so that they would write him off as not physically fit, right? So you had one guy, because in those days they didn't draft homosexuals, thus the panties, right? And so guys were trying every conceivable gimmick in the world to get out of it. Let me tell you, that didn't work. Like the guy that was slept, they just write him a pass and, okay, come back next week, So, you basically, if you had 2 arms, 2 legs, and somewhat of a head, you got drafted. That's pretty much,
What
it was
about
just.
bad vision?
No, that didn't matter. They just give you thicker glasses, yeah. You had to be in ridiculously bad shape not to be drafted in that physical, as I watched the different characters around me. But let's get back to the question in hand, okay? What would you do?
So I feel like you would have to say no and just take the consequences of saying no.
Okay.
I feel like that's the best decision you have.
You know what those consequences are?
Jail.
Yeah. Not for the rest of your life, but jail, yeah.
Become a pastor?
Become a pastor, no, that doesn't do anything for you.
No?
Nope. Quaker, maybe if you join, you could get a conscientious objector thing. Yeah, you can't just run out and join them, because otherwise those churches have been full during Vietnam. Yeah.
So if what they were fighting for was totally immoral and totally against it, and there was no ability to flee to serve the Lord elsewhere, then I would submit to authority in that, but not break any of the Lord's moral laws in war.
So in other words, you weren't going to kill anybody.
So imagine a kid in the German army in World War II.
Yeah. So I would use it as a witnessing opportunity and most likely die in the process.
Of course, if you've not been in the military, you have no idea what they can make you do. You have no idea what they can make you do and how they can break you. Yeah.
I get my dad to fake my death.
So what? Yeah. Okay. Fake your death. Change your identity. Well, change your identity. There are guys paying money to have that done. Yeah. Right. So this is one of those kind of things. How much do you, as a Christian, what hills are you willing to die on for the values you think that are important? And is there a difference between, and other questions bloom out of this? Is there just wars, unjust wars? How do you know the difference? And that kind of stuff. By the way, Vietnam, if you were a Christian in a Christian community during Vietnam, the overwhelming emphasis was you need to go and fight the commies. That was the narrative. If you're a good Christian, you should be over there fighting the commies. It wasn't until I went to Bible college in Europe where they went, what the heck are you Americans doing? And they started talking about how the war was unjust and da-da-da-da-da. And I had already felt that way, but it was really nice to have the support of the Christian community, because in my Christian community, I was considered like an outlier because I was pushing the ball in the wrong direction. And so I don't want to be part of this. And by the way, I got out of the draft accidentally. I had a low number. They were drafting guys with my number because the Vietnam War was at its height. And I told somebody the story, but I went into my draft board And I think it was, I've always said she was probably the ugliest woman in the world that was the gal behind the desk that I had to go and report to. And I'm sitting at her desk and she goes, well, congratulations, Mr. Bundschuh, you have a deferment, which means we're not going to draft you. You get out of the draft. I go, what? She goes, well, yes, you're 4D. 4D. Now I knew 4F was physically, you couldn't physically go in the draft. And she goes, well, there's 4M. She goes, there's 4D. And I go, yeah, I know what that is. She goes, and there's 4M. And I thought, 4M, okay, what is that? And she goes, that's medical. If you're going to med school, you can get out of the draft till you're done with med school. And she goes, but you're 4D. And I thought, what's that? I'm too dumb to go to the Vietnam? I mean, something like that. And she goes, no, you signed up for a divinity school. Believe it or not, you were all in a divinity school. And she goes, those are the only 3 exemptions you had. Suddenly she turned into the most beautiful woman on earth, you know? And I floated out of that draft office because I was 18 years old, figuring I'm going to be in Vietnam within the next 3 months, you know? And instead I was in England and going to Bible college. So.
Highly doubt that's a thing anymore.
Huh?
Highly doubt that's a thing.
I highly doubt that too. They're probably not going to let that happen, but they did then. So, anyway, those are really hard questions. And what kind of price would you have to pay if you ran away, you know, or you went to jail, you know? I mean, that's a big price to pay on if you really believe that. And something like that, you're going to have people calling out to do your patriotic duty, right? The pressure of society, if they're going to war, is usually against the people who don't want to go. As you guys who saw Hacksaw Ridge, you guys who watched that movie, the pressure was gnarly against that guy, you know? Okay. Before you were a Christian, you had photos taken that we considered porn. And you hear they're floating around the internet. You're now in a serious relationship. Do you tell your potential mate about the photos? It has the potential to be a serious relationship. Okay, all right, how many of you would tell? Oh, all right, how many would just be quiet, let them find out on their own? Okay. Very interesting, very interesting. But that'd be a really hard conversation if it was a serious relationship, because some people would just go, whoa, you know? Really. Okay, we're going to blast through a couple more of these, and then we're going to be done. Okay. All right. You're married. While socializing, you meet a person who you find extremely attractive and beguiling. For just a moment, you imagine yourself rolling in the hay with them before shaking your mind and getting back on track. I know none of you have ever had that experience, but just imagine you did, okay? Your spouse notices your unusual behavior and asks, what are you thinking? Do you tell them? All right? All right. How many of you think, now you're not married, What would you do? Okay, so we're going to go into different stages. How many of you just wouldn't say anything? Okay? Okay. How many of you think you should say something, but you wouldn't? Okay? I'm just, same thing. And how many of you would say something? Okay, all right. That could be gnarly. It could depend on who. So what if your spouse is super insecure?
It's gonna be worse if she finds out later.
Well, how's she gonna find out? It was just in your brain. It's just a thought.
Things develop. Because she's super insecure and she'll have her own thoughts about how you feel.
Okay, we have married folks in the room. How would you get out of this? No, not you. Just don't point at him. Just Gary and I are guys. It's not like this is our trip, you know. Women do the same thing.
From the very beginning, we've known each other a long, long, long time. We have been gut-wrenching honest with each other, and it has just made us best friends and, built on the trust level. So it's not easy, but it gets easier and easier because it just honestly builds trust. It's the very opposite of what you think. I don't want to say anything because they're going to get all freaked out and act weird, but it's weird. It is completely being opposite. When they say something, you just know. And so it's worked really well.
Not fun to do.
Not fun to do. Yeah. Yeah.
I was sure that there was an experience like this, and where it was at a worship conference with my daughter, and these thoughts were coming in my mind that I never would have thought of before ever. Like, this is somebody I knew just at ministerial meetings, and I was thinking thoughts of, he might make a really nice husband, and what is going on? I've never thought of this before. What's going on? So I felt so defiled in my spirit that I thought that thought. So I nipped it in the bud that night. I came home after this worship conference, and I just said, Tim, I know this is awkward, but this thought came in my mind, and I don't want anything to come between us. And so I just shared these thoughts, and just so you know, that I would, but accountability, and honey, if that ever happens to you, can you please tell me whether it's something in your own sinful nature or a spiritual attack of a temptation where the enemy wants to derail us. We need to have so open communication so we can keep this intimacy in a relationship. And I think it was hard for him at first, but then it served as a catalyst for open communication, for accountability if that ever happens again.
But it's a hard thing, and sometimes, I mean, if you're married to somebody who's very fragile or very suspicious, it can actually backfire on you and that kind of
Those
stuff.
suspicious people can tell something's up.
Yeah. Well, they think something's up all the time anyhow, so, yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, if you're with someone who's super insecure, then that's not. I would think that would be your responsibility to make sure they're okay all the time, because I think they.
If you can.
God.
If you can. You try to do that. You try to build this walls of security, but remember that's oftentimes their problem, not something you're doing. All right, last one. Okay, last one. Real fast. You have a dream job at the CIA. Now they tell you they would like to create a fake ID and background story for you so you can spy on I can't say the word, suspicious characters. This is clearly an act of deception. As a Christian, do you say yes to the offer?
Don't go into the CIA if you don't want to be.
Okay, you only got 1 minute to talk about it. Yes? Okay, how many of you would accept the offer? Okay. Yeah, of course. How many would go, nope, I can't do that. That's moving into bad territory for me. Do we have any precedent from the Bible about spies?
Yes.
Yeah, quite a few of them, okay? Quite a few of them. And the presumption is they didn't walk down and go, I'm a spy from Israel, just checking things out. They were disguising themselves. They were integrating in order to get the information to, and by the way, God, the scriptures, if you look at the passages that I give down at the bottom, the God actually tells them to do that. He assigns them to send spies. So God was approving of that kind of deception in that area. Okay, your question for lunchtime is a simple, easy one to answer. Goes like this. Are your hands clean if you believe in the death penalty and voted to keep it, but refuse to pull the switch that sends someone to the death? So so that's your, I don't want the answer, just think about that one. Are your hands clean, you vote for the death penalty, but you would not be the guy, if they say, okay, you voted for it, you pull the switch, you go, no, I'm not going to do that, because I don't want to do it. So are you tactful? You're in essence still guilty if you vote for the death penalty, as if you actually did the deed. That's the end. Go have a little bit of a break and then ponder some of these things.